thank you everybody for coming and joining in on, for me, very personal thing. So thank you, Phil, for joining. And I do want to start this out in saying thank you. I mean, you're the reason why we're here this year. And I did want to put that out there because it was your vision to say, even if we're in the pandemic, we got to get started and we got to start about talking about light again. So us meeting in Los Angeles set all of this off. So thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. And I got to say, I couldn't have done it without my colleague Sarah Horton, who pulled all of our display here together. So it's a team effort.
And I came across, I just quickly want to say this, I came across the soft drop because we were doing Downhill, the movie, and it was a big movie and a lot of names attached to it. And it was a big question in the beginning, how do we do the studio and how do we create something real in there? And the idea, because I've seen it at Camerimage actually, previous years was the idea to do something with a soft drop. So that's how we started talk. So what Phil was so kind enough to share with us today is basically a presentation about how the soft drop and what it actually is and how it works. And it's an astonishing thing, and when we finished here, we'll be glad to show you what we've built up back there, because it's basically showcasing in just incredible way how to get a really realistic look in the studio. And I think it's, yeah, I'm just totally hyped about this whole thing, so.
Great. And it's also, it's kind of a review of the last couple of years, because it's been a while since we've been here, so I just wanted to sort of give people an update on what we're doing and some new techniques we've come up with, and just generally improve the knowledge base out there.
And just to make you feel uncomfortable, he's the guy who invented it, and he got a Technical Academy Award for it, so. There's a genius behind it. And he studied physics, I just heard.
Yeah, Imperial College, London.
So there's a lot of stuff behind it, yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay, so, well, so obviously, this is me. It's the easy one. This is Sarah, my colleague, who's my opposite number in Berlin, does the photography, a former art director, so actually has a very good understanding of some of the aspects of this that I perhaps don't have quite the grasp on. But again, we work as a team, and as such, we fill in each other's gaps in knowledge, and in the process enhance both our knowledges. So it's a good working relationship. This is actually the first show that I did. It's an embarrassingly long time ago, 1993, and basically I'd been working for Rosco. In another capacity, and they already had been doing backdrops, but the way they were doing day-nights was the old theatrical technique, which was to actually print on the front, but to hand paint on the back. And basically Stan Miller, who was the owner of Rosco at that time, said, hey, maybe you can do something better with this. And so what I did was I found a way to make the front and back registration work such that we could print day on the front and a sort of super pumped up night on the back. And that was basically what created the day-night effect. So
I just want to take it one step back. So basically what we're talking about is we're in a studio, we're looking out the window, and we don't want to look at some weird wall. We actually want to have a feeling we're somewhere on set. And basically, I mean, it started out with painting, right? That's what the first thing that was, to create something more realistic on the window.
I mean, originally everything was hand painted, and that continued into the like 20s, 30s when photographic methods started to appear. Originally black and white, and then tinted, and then around '84, I think. Colored translights came in, but by then computer printing was coming in as well, so that was kind of the end of that. So I think the first color translight was one from the Heart, but the first computer printed feature was only 3 years after that, and since then computer printing has really become dominant. So this is actually one of the drops from NYPD Blue. I didn't shoot this, it was a photographer in LA called Richard Lund, who actually had been working for a competitor and then went freelance, and so he shot it and we printed. And you can see this is a shot of it on the floor. You can see some of the sheen and stuff. There's an inherent problem with the vinyl. So we were looking for an alternative approach.
So the Translight, that's all basically vinyl plastic printing that was done?
Well, before that, it was polyester, 9mm polyester. So originally it was like a big photographic slide, and that was the true Translight. because it was translucent to light, like a slide. And then the vinyl day-nights came in, and of course, because the word was already in use, people just started calling them Translights.
So basically, when you lit them from the back, you had the feeling that lights were on, basically. And
so that was where we went with the day-night, yeah.
When you front lit it, was it with Translights too? When you front lit it, feel like day?
No, because Translights really weren't designed to be front lit. They were only designed to be backlit. There was a very old theatrical back painting technique that allowed you to do both, which we shamelessly ripped off in creating the day-night method. But yeah, Translight's very much a one-way thing, the same as a photographic slide would be a one-way thing.
Mm-hmm. So this was still on vinyl?
So this is 1993. This was on vinyl. We stayed on vinyl for 20 years, and then during 20 years of using large pieces of single-use plastic, a lot of guilt built up. So we were really looking for something that was a little bit more ecologically friendly, a bit less shiny, a bit less heavy, and a few other things besides. And so we came across a printing process that became soft drop.
So you were able to move away from plastic to whatever material we have here right now in the thing.
So this is cotton. It's an all-natural material, and it comes in very large sizes. And the machine is enormous. So here's a slide that Sarah likes, just the concept of the slide. A lot of kids are very familiar with the idea of going to the museum and seeing the big dinosaur, and oh, how big it is. So we can print soft drops twice that big. So 12 meters high, 55 meters long in one piece.
You have a printing process that can print one single sheet that is 12 meters high and 50 meters long.
Correct, which requires a 13 meter effectively width on a machine and a very big roller.
Okay, that's insane. And for even printing that big, you get that kind of a quality and perfection and detail.
Yeah, in fact, we actually spend a lot of time degrading our images to create artificial depth of field. So to a camera, it looks a lot more realistic. I mean, you can create something that's just too sharp.
Yeah, it's like looking out of the window. It doesn't feel like so sharp in the background.
Yeah. Except, of course, when you're doing a movie, you shouldn't be looking out the window. You should be looking at the guy in front of the window. If the audience is looking out the window, your movie probably has a problem. So this is one of the shows that we worked on this year. It's called Mayor of Easttown. It was for HBO.
With Kate Winslet, that's amazing.
Yeah, great performance. And I'd actually forgotten that we'd done the backdrops, and it was for a friend of mine, Jim Truesdell, who's the art director, but we were very busy at the time, and it slipped my mind. And when I watched the show, I didn't even realize there were backdrops, even though there were hours, which is, I guess I'm just getting old, but it was definitely a lapse.
What would you say is the magic of the soft drop? Why would even you not recognize that it is so real?
The fact that it's so matte means that it looks realistic at pretty much any angle, I think. There's no kick off it, there's no sheen, there's no artificialness about it. It just looks like how it would look out the window. I mean, we have one set up over here that I first encountered when it was in its full daytime mode. It's actually cycling between day and night. But I came through the door and I wasn't really paying attention as usual. And I looked through the window that Sarah had created, and I saw the scene. And just for an instant, I thought it was real. I thought I was looking out on the real world because the color temperature was correct. There was a three-dimensional quality to it that was slightly bizarre, and I think the artificial depth of field that we build in helps to sell that sensation of depth. And of course, your lighting on it was actually really, really good as well.
I mean, I think that's the really creative thing about it. So it's not just about having, a big piece of soft drop that looks real. It's actually when you start to light it and you say, well, there's sky here. Let's do that a little bit brighter. And then we say, there's a little window here. Do we have to do it tungsten at night, or do we leave it out? And there's an incredible creative process that comes actually with lighting it. It's not just making it bright for the background. I think it's very rewarding.
I think maybe in the case of Mayor of Easttown, there was a sort of aversion therapy going on because the view out the window was kind of so ugly and boring that it was like, I don't want to look out there. I'm going to watch the actor.
But that, interesting enough, only works if you believe what's outside. As soon as something's wrong, your attention immediately goes there, no?
Yeah, and Sarah actually has an interesting theory about that. There's a percentage of reality that you need to achieve, and once you drop below that level, it looks fake, and nothing that you can do will bring you back again. Once you lose that suspension of disbelief.
I mean, it's like what we had on Downhill too, because Sarah was actually, if I remember correct, was taking these images. So it's not just something that you create and you take, it's actually something that is really specially made for a movie, no?
Yeah, I mean, we will take other people's photos, but we prefer to shoot it because the results end up a little bit better. So speaking of which, here's one that I shot. This is from another HBO show called Perry Mason that was shot in Los Angeles. It's really hard to show these things because so many of them are so huge that when you put it up on screen, this is it was a 270-degree wraparound. So you can hardly see it. So here's a slightly closer shot from one of the sunnier set. This was shot on a Mamiya 645, I think with the 45 millimeter lens on it, if anyone's interested.
What's also so interesting is that, you know, we always talk about a realism that comes in. And when you're lighting this, and especially in studios like with here, you don't have too much distance. All the spill light that's coming back off of it compared to green or blue screen is so realistic. You can use it in reflections. Yeah. You can use it up there. That's what really just caught us, yeah.
Yeah, there was a presentation yesterday just on exactly that subject. Jamie sitting here talking about the greens coming through the windows. And I was thinking, yes, exactly that. So yeah, you can actually use the backdrop as a light source because all of the light coming off it is obviously very naturalistic. So it adds to the scene rather than fighting with it.
I mean, I think that's where it gets really interesting because if you look at, if I may go back, if you look at this, you front light this, right? It's daylight, like we have it back there. You hit more into the sky, you do less down below, whatever. And as soon as you then go to night, you actually light it from the back.
Yeah, so lighting from the back, you go to full night. We'll send you out a proof that sort of says how an average lighting situation will make it look. But it is just an average situation. I mean, in reality, people might want a much darker sky than this. And the way to achieve that is to, rather than just evenly lighted, to actually have more of the light going at the bottom. And of course, the mirror distribution system that you have really works with that because you can put light exactly where you want it. It's a very painterly approach to light. So you can get highlights and you can actually let the sky drop off to full blackness.
It was interesting. What we did on Downhill was like we had a whole bunch of sky panels there. We had them extra for the sky, for the front, for the day, and extra for down below. Then we did the back. And when Danny Cohen first time came in, we were pre-lighting it for a longer time. It was a huge stage. I had to show him that, say, Dan, just stand in front of the window and look outside. And we programmed an animation going from day to night. And animation was 5 minutes, and you could stand there looking at it, and it really felt like the dawn is coming on. Just by how much you do front lit, how much you do back lit, it's actually, you really can do this thing live, which is incredible that it works for the eye.
Yeah, I mean, we call it day-night, but it's really every stage in between if you do it right. So you can get a really good twilight, dusk, sunrise, sunset. I mean, and by playing with color temperatures, you can suggest rain. You can actually project the texture of rain onto these things as well. So if you've got a rain effect going in the foreground, you can actually have it mirrored in the rain feeling that's going down the backdrop as well.
How does that work?
If you use one of our RX24 projectors, or I guess pretty much any sort of gobo rotator system, it's not a question of making individual raindrops. It's just that sheeting feeling that rain gives you. Or similarly, if you have like fog drifting, just that sensation of a little bit of motion is enough to sell the reality of it, even though it's a very theatrical, very old school theatrical technique, as indeed are backdrops.
Interesting.
Here's another massive one. Seems to be our specialty of late. This is from the second version of the Suicide Squad, so the Suicide Squad. This drop was 230 meters long and approximately, I think, 12 high. It's supposed to be inside a jungle, and one of the challenges was figuring out how to shoot inside a jungle and get that much imagery, because the fact is that when you're shooting inside a jungle, you literally cannot see the jungle because of the trees. So the way that we approached it was, you can just see in the bottom corner here, to go to a road, where the road was about 20 meters across, so I could get far enough back with the camera to get the forest, but the canopy was over the top, so the shadows within the forest felt realistic. And then armed with that, I just basically walked down the road, taking half-frame overlap shots for the requisite 230 meters and called it good. And that was what we printed.
Is that something you do when you take the photos? They take care of what time of day it is, or if it's like overcast or sky?
Well, you try to shoot as many different conditions as possible. So you try to get overcast, you try to get sunny. In this instance, we needed jungle. So that was the driving thing. But they wanted this strong backlit feeling, because obviously the light filters down through the trees, but what you see in the front is largely in shadow. So if we go back to this, you can see how the bottom half of the backdrop was very dark, and only as you start getting up into the leaves does it actually light up a bit. But yeah, so we were always trying to optimize and again, trying to figure out with the art director, particularly often with the cinematographer, what the requirements of the script are, because there's no point in making a sunny, happy drop if you've got a movie where it's raining 90% of the time. So you try to adapt. This is another big one, as always. Only 70 meters, so not enormous, but still reasonably decent sized. Very New York City, very period New York City, so 1980-ish. So a lot of the buildings on the left side of this actually got taken out. One of the things we did, though, was there's St. Patrick's, I believe, Cathedral, the spires in the foreground. We actually removed those from the backing, and the art department built them on stage. One pretty much full size and one about 3/4 scale. So they had a forced perspective model of the spires. So as you transitioned left to right on stage, you actually had a parallax effect that was displayed on the spires. And it was unbelievably effective. And Mark, the designer, was getting people calling up, asking him how he did it. And how he did it was using one of the oldest theatrical techniques in the book.
Just going back to 230 meters of soft drop, what is that? That's for a studio inside, or do
that's an entire wrapping 4 walls of a studio and building an island in the middle of it. They built a jungle. We just extended it.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. Whereas this, they built a building and then we just wrapped it, as it were. Here's one that might be a bit more familiar to the people who are at Camera Image, and certainly people who are in this room tomorrow. This is from the Dune Reshoots. I actually was working on this with Greg Fraser. We printed a section of it and he came by in LA. He didn't shoot the reshoots, but he was still very much responsible for the visual look of the show. And he was over here working with Sarah, because it was a European show. And so it was very much a sort of back and forth, a very Rosco kind of worldwide, bits and pieces all over the place kind of show. But absolutely beautiful image. So this is what we printed up as a test, and this is what Greg and I were playing with and sort of testing different light levels, and we had a couple of different versions with different densities that we tested. I'm not even sure if it made it into the show. I don't think it did, but maybe it's for Dune 2. This one definitely did make it into the show. This is from Marcus Federer's Shipbreaker / The Colony / Tides, depending on where you are and what part of the process you're on. So this, another enormous 100-meter drop. This one, not a day-night, but a sort of a day-day with just different levels of fog and clouds texture in the background there, that by front lighting or back lighting you could bring up more or less texture to match the look of the tidelands in Germany, which Marcus, I think, covered in a lot more detail in his seminar, his panel with the other guys from the show. And this is a blur target that we created for them. This is something we normally do to allow people to assess the artificial depth of field. So typically, if you've got a city, you might do a 4 blur on foreground buildings, going to a 6 blur in the midground, to an 8, and then 12 as you. So what the camera sees is increasingly soft. We were finding that for a while, particularly when the Alexas came out, they were really looking at backdrops as though they were just flat. They were looking horribly flat, and the traditional solution is just to blur the whole thing. But obviously, if you blur the whole thing too much, you just end up with 18% gray typically, which looks even flatter. So it was a delicate balance, but this stepped approach really makes things look three-dimensional.
So that means within one soft drop, you do different levels of blur?
Yeah.
So it's like in the further it's away, the more it's blurred, for example?
Yeah, and it also means that each backdrop gets a slightly different blur level, because obviously if this one's playing only 12 feet outside the window, and somebody else is playing 20 feet outside the window, say, they require different approaches in terms of blur. And quite often, if you're doing somebody's back garden, and you've got 30 feet of bushes and trees, you actually don't want very much blur on the foreground at all, because you're going to have a bit of a sharp transition between the last real tree and the first bit of the backdrop. So sometimes there might be no blur at all on the foreground elements, and then it starts dropping off quickly. I'm sure there's a very, very complex mathematical formula for this, but we tend to just do it by eye. Yeah. One of the other things we've noticed over the years is that shows tend to come in clusters. So quite often there'll be like 2 or 3 shows set in Austin, Texas in the same year, or 2 or 3 shows set in some other relatively unknown place. In this instance, the Watergate building, which was obviously famous during Richard Nixon's day, played in 2 successive projects that we had. One, the Monica Lewinsky story, because she used to live there, and then another one that was more Nixon-related. It happened that one of my American colleagues shot the first version, which is the one you see here, but then just a couple of months later, I went back and effectively shot the same view reversed from the rooftop. So it's just peculiar. I don't know why that works, but I mean, it's like back when there was Armageddon and the other enormous lump of whatever hitting the Earth. Movies tend to move in clusters. Not sure why. Yeah. One of the clusters I have going on right now is I seem to have become known as the Vineyard Shooter. Not objecting. I'd rather be the Brewery Shooter, but vineyards are good. This was from Picard, Star Trek Picard, and it's Jean-Luc's vineyard, or at least it was one of the scout shots that was potentially Jean-Luc's vineyard, because I actually went up there with the designer Dave, and we spent the day just going around vineyards and shooting. If anyone's seen Sideways, it was a little bit like that. And then, sure enough, like 2 months later, I'm working on another one. This is for ABC called Promised Land, and yep, we're back in the same town in California doing vineyards again. It just works that way sometimes. We do a lot of superhero movies, both for DC and for Marvel. This happens to be a Marvel show, Shang-Chi. This, again, is something I got from Sue Chan, who's the art director. Just, they wanted a bit more chroma in there, so went in and adjusted the level. So there was a sort of before and after that went back to the designer and to the cinematographer just to see that they were doing okay. And as you can see, I mean, superhero movies may be very interesting, but backdrops for them are not necessarily. This is almost the most boring thing I'd done that month, but it was actually beaten by the other one, which I also did for Shang-Chi, which was view out of the other window, which was even more boring.
But it's interesting. I remember that's what actually sold Danny Cohen on the idea with the soft drop, that he was in such close collaborationship. Oh, I can choose how much depth it has. Oh, I can choose how much saturation it has. That was actually what made him feel comfortable about doing something he'd never done way before.
Yeah, and it's strange. I mean, sometimes it takes one or two go back and forths, and I remember a nightmare show we had to do 50. We had to do 50 iterations of the image, just change this, and it was just, it took a month. And one of my operators nearly had a breakdown. One of the things that we've finally got our act together on in Europe is rentals. We've offered them for a while, but we never really had it very organized. But now our facility in Madrid is the center for the mural rental business, for the backdrop rental business. And we've got, I think, over 100 soft drops. So it's a relatively inexpensive way of getting soft drops onto your project. It's about 1/10 of the cost. Of course, you have to pick something that already exists, that somebody else chose. But frankly, I mean, if you're picking an image that Marcus Furter already approved, there are worse ways to go.
I mean, then again, it's what you say. First of all, there's a cost issue. You don't have to do something new. You already got it. It's faster.
Yep.
And then obviously, you know, you're looking out a window, a sky is a sky, you know, a forest is a forest. So I guess there's that too, no?
Yeah, and a ski resort is a ski resort. So if you want to get Jakob's drop that he had on downhill, we can't get that one because apparently somebody broke it. Yes.
It wasn't me.
Which happens. So roscodigital.com is where to look for it, or just talk to Sarah, who's over here, and she'll be the person to help you out. Like I said, we do a lot of superhero movies. This is a typical sort of image that we send out to people. It's the day-night image, so you can see this is how this is going to look in the day, this is how it's going to look at night, and you know, sometimes people might want to add a few more windows, or you know, change the uplight on a building, and we can build that in. And then you can still do stuff in the lighting as well, so you're not just baked into this. I mean, this image is obviously baked in, but you're not just locked into it. You can get more out of it. This is actually from Batwoman, which is in production in Vancouver. Okay, here's something that I have to be a bit careful talking about. It's a test that we did for Greg Fraser, and I'm not going to say which movie it was for, but it was definitely not for Batwoman. Okay, you can draw your own conclusions. But what Greg was trying to do was achieve a sort of a wrap of light around a building. So we actually didn't just do a day-night backdrop. We provided this silhouette to go behind the backdrop, so that by slamming this with light, he could actually create this sort of snuggling, warm blanket of light wrapping around one of the buildings in shot for a sunrise effect. And then, of course, being Rosco, we then shamelessly ripped off the technique for somebody else on another movie. This is from Hocus Pocus 2, which is currently in production, and the designer for that was here earlier, Nelson Coates. They needed winter trees, and they were shooting this summer in Rhode Island, so they only had summer trees. So I had a brilliant idea, which was to get our photographer in New Zealand, where it was winter, to go out and shoot the trees. Unfortunately, what I didn't know is that trees in New Zealand are not deciduous, so not all of the trees still have their leaves on anyway, so we probably could have shot it in Rhode Island. So we shot it, and Sarah actually did the assembly. So we shot it in New Zealand. Sarah did the assembly work in Berlin. I then started doing the night work in Los Angeles. So this was probably a very low contrast night that you're going to have difficulty seeing. I think we improved the contrast a bit on the way through. But then instead of doing a day-night, what we did was we put the night on the front, and then we put this on the back. So very high contrast silhouette printed on the back. Basically, what the white on the back in the sky at night allows us to do is pump light through for a dawn shot. So it's about the transition from a night forest into a dawn forest. And in the background, you start seeing pinks and blues and whatever other color you fancy coming up in the sky. So it's not just day-night. It's a reversal of the idea, but it gives you a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, and it creates a three-dimensionality to it too, doing it like that. That's very impressive, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems a little bit geeky, but when you get into it and you start working with it, it's that stuff really suddenly just pushes your image to the next level, doing stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that the more effort you put in, the more you can get out of it. So, and with anything else. It's that last 10% of effort that creates 90% of the look. So just making a little bit more effort really, really reaps benefits. Here's something a bit more modern, and a very modern problem as well. We often get asked about LED volumes. It's definitely the buzzword of the moment. And I actually have had a very extensive discussion with Greg Fraser about this, who, of course, with The Mandalorian is the king of volume. And his opinion basically is that there's room in the world for both things. There's room for backdrops and LED volumes, but one will not drive out the other. The first thing that the LED volume is going to kill is the blue screen. So on CSI Las Vegas, when they did the reboot, they were absolutely convinced they wanted to do an LED volume. So as I've been shooting stills and motion plates now for 12 years as just part of the package, it was natural to come to Rosco to have us shoot them. But they started out, they wanted a volume. They got the price from one of the VFX companies for a volume. The line producer nearly had a heart attack when he saw the price. So instead they bought a backdrop. And so this is the backdrop they bought instead, because it was literally a 10-to-1 price difference. So I think until the price of the volumes comes down, we're going to be still making backdrops for a very long time. However, having said that, of course, if you are a company that's been in business as long as we have, and you can see that there's some new technology coming, one might assume that is something that we would be at least aware of or taking an interest in. And on that note, here's my final teaser for next year's Camera Image. So if anyone sees my presentation next year here, which is going to be amazing, just so you know, and anyone who's been here today or seen it online and reminds me about this slide, I'll actually buy them a beer, because this thing is going to be incredible.
Well, we're looking forward to that. I guess on that note, I guess we're just going to go in there and get a chance for everybody to really have a look at what's happening.
Sure.
Sure.
Great.
Totally. Thanks so much.
Thank you.